Hello, how you going, random stranger? Welcome back to Fate Zero. We last time finally got a peek into Kiritsugu's past, and it opened up a whole bunch of rationales for how Kiritsugu came to adopt his very utilitarian and sacrifice a few for the many sort of philosophy. And it was basically because of an emotional trauma fest that he went through that took us from innocent baby Kiritsugu to grown-up stoic killer Kiritsugu. So three people loomed really large in Kiritsugu's formative years, and we'll talk more about them later. There was Shirley, who planted in Kiritsugu the idea of changing the world for the better. His dad, who really modeled the ends justifies the means kind of mentality that Kiritsugu ended up adopting, if for a different goal. And then there was Natalia, of course, his surrogate family, who gave him the skills of a killer mercenary assassin, and also ended up being like the source of his emotional breakdown, and then remaking into this emotionless zealot. So if you guys are ready, here we go with the recap. I think this one's going to be pretty meaty. So the opening of episode 5 felt so out of place in the universe of Fate Zero because of this beautiful scenery that we saw, the sparkling waters and this very idyllic village life, and also because of the fact that Kiritsugu was actually smiling, which is a little bit weird to see. They set it up so beautifully, I think, as an intentional contrast to the coming zombie apocalypse, to highlight just how quickly innocence and beauty can be shattered by tragedy in an instant. Another reason is to just make us, or make me, just stress out. You know, I knew as soon as the episode opened on this pristine island that shit was going to hit the fan real bad, because the higher the rise, the greater the fall. In these first serene moments, they also weaves in some interesting layers of metaphor and of foreshadowing. So the island's name, Alimango, meaning crab, came from the story of a desperate girl who was transformed into a crab by the sea gods after she stole some food offerings to feed her sick mother, which is really sad. I didn't know it at the time, but it set up this great allegorical link between the island's name and the unnatural transformations that would happen there later. It also illuminated a sense of callousness on the part of those who are in power or who have power. Just like how the girl and her mother's right to life meant nothing to the sea gods, so the village people and their right to not be treated as fodder or just byproducts of human experimentation gone wrong was disregarded by Kiritsugu's dad. So the injustice that results when those in power or those who are more powerful misuse or abuse or are just careless with their power pointed towards what would eventually become Kiritsugu's core motivation: to correct the world's wrongs and injustices, to put those people who are in power in place, no matter the cost. As Shirley was sort of telling Kiritsugu the outcome of this very tragic story, I thought it was interesting how at that moment they focused the shot on the reverend standing in front of his church. You know, an institution that is meant to uphold justice and moral ideals, but in reality often only exists to enrich and empower itself. Also, the fact that the church exists alongside other pagan or magical powers like the sea gods also foreshadowed how both the Church Executors and the Mages Association, two very different organizations with very different goals, would both contribute to the ruin of the island. And given how these two supposedly noble institutions, the Church and the Mages Association, are really only out for themselves, also explains why Kiritsugu felt his role was to work outside of, or sometimes even against, those established institutions. Lastly, just the fact that the shrine to the sea gods was near the Emiya mansion was another ominous hint at the curse, or like the darkness that was just sitting right there at the townspeople's doorsteps, ready to be unleashed on them unsuspectingly. Yeah, so on rewatch, I thought it was cool how they threaded all of those allegorical tapestry-like threads throughout a deceptively cheerful opening to foreshadow all of the forces, the magical, the religious, and the mythical forces that would soon turn Kiritsugu's world upside down and just set him on his lifetime of war path. We got a bit of teasing Kiritsugu about his name, and later Natalia also commented on how well it fits him because it relates to his origin and his signature attack, the origin bullets that sever magic circuits and then reties them again improperly. And we already got a hint or an insight into this in the episode where Kiritsugu absolutely destroyed Kenneth. But when you drill down into all the other ways that his name connects to his overall philosophy and his life trajectory, it's pretty cool. And by cool, I mean like pretty tragic as well. This idea of severing and binding matches his ruthless approach of cutting down a life if necessary in order to save more lives. But we all know that when you enact violence to do good, there are certain unintended consequences. There's also like the broader symbolism of him severing or cutting away traditional morality and ethics and familial ties. Anything that would hinder his mission, he cuts away, for a supposedly greater purpose. Kiritsugu represents like cutting away or severing parts of himself too, I think, to carry out this extreme utilitarian kind of work, whether that is severing his own humanity or his compassion or a chance at a normal life. And I think every time that he killed, he lost another part of himself. And he most definitely was not the same after he brutally severed Natalia from his life for the sake of saving other people. And he, in the process, tied himself back together or remade himself into someone who could sacrifice anything for the work. Natalia was the ultimate test case. He made the decision, was able to just cut her away. And then in place of that grew this person who, because he had already made the ultimate sacrifice, could sacrifice anything and anyone else after that. So in both specific mage techniques and also his broader character development, Kiritsugu's name signifies a lot. As an aside, I thought I'd bring up again what a coincidence or not it is that Kiritsugu started out with 66 origin bullets, because there are also 66 books in the Bible. And there have been so many other biblical references that I just wouldn't be surprised if there was a clear intention to convey the almost biblical or prophetic role that Kiritsugu sees himself as having. He sees himself as literally the one and only savior of the world. Okay, so we met Kiritsugu's father, whose name I don't think was mentioned, but some of you said it was Norikata. As soon as he, talked about how he's managed to make plants essentially immortal, and then wondered out loud whether the same can be done to humans, I was like, here we go. At first I kind of thought he was just a harmless plant dude, but that idea was put to rest real quick. I think it is worth comparing how Kiritsugu's dad and Natalia, the two parent figures in Kiritsugu's life, are very similar in some ways, but also very different in others, particularly as they related to and taught Kiritsugu what they knew. For starters, they are both pragmatic to a fault. Their respective occupations required or kind of just naturally suited a certain cold-blooded, practical mentality that was okay with sacrificing or devaluing human lives to get their work done. So no prizes for guessing where Kiritsugu got that from. This shrewd practicality was particularly apt for their situation of being both rogue operatives working outside the key institutions of the church and the Mages Association. Neither of them had any real axe to grind other than to pursue their respective wishes. Norikata wanted to unlock the secrets of immortality, while Natalia just wanted to earn buttloads of cash. So as such, they were experts in emotional detachment, being able to separate out their feelings from their work, because so often their work needed to use people as tools. Natalia treated targets in missions just as things to complete, so that she'd get paid. And the only attachment we know of that she formed with someone was with Kiritsugu, which we will also talk about later. Meanwhile, Kiritsugu's dad viewed human test subjects with this chilling dispassion. When Kiritsugu overheard Shirley arguing with the Reverend, trying to get him to accept Norikata, which wasn't going to happen because he's like this heretic in the Reverend's eyes, Kiritsugu very naively thought that the solution was just to get his dad to spend more time with the villagers, when really I think the reason why Norikata never interacted with the villagers is because he couldn't, or he didn't see the point in developing any ounce of care for them or seeing them as human beings. Like, what if, God forbid, his experiment went wrong and he accidentally infected all these people? Which was a possibility that he'd already planned for. Or what if he needed people to actively experiment on later? If he already had that sort of mindset, it's no wonder that he didn't feel the need or want to interact any more with the villagers than he needed to. Another way Kiritsugu's dad was similar to Natalia was how they each in their own way manipulated Kiritsugu as a kid. They molded his mindset and his skills to eventually suit their own agendas. His father groomed him as a successor, which isn't as innocuous as it sounds. It was made fairly clear that he was partly pursuing immortality so that one day an emir, perhaps Kiritsugu, could turn into an immortal dead apostle and thus have all of eternity to complete the research. From danylonazarov, I always feel bad for Norikata, Kiri's dad, a bit. It is borderline impossible for classical mage to be a decent human being, but Norikata, despite obviously having a lack of common human morals, had the decency to at least be a good parent and genuinely loved and cared for Kiritsugu. It is even stated in the light novel that he specifically waited for Kiritsugu so they could leave the island. I really appreciate this comment because it gave me a different perspective. I think I was so thrown by Norikata's indifference to the human suffering that he had indirectly or directly caused, and sort of how he subsumed morals to his larger goal of buying time to get at the root, that I didn't give too much thought to the fact that he had waited for Kiritsugu to get off the island. Part of me, though, is still skeptical, because I think preserving his kid's life is also tied to his overall goal of gaining more knowledge. But you're right, I think that there was a degree of care there that is not insignificant. I also think it's important to remember that even though Kiritsugu would hate to think about it, he ended up adopting a lot of his father's thinking and behaviors. His dad displayed a completely detached, amoral obsession with advancing his magical research without regard for ethics or human cost. That modeled the mentality of the ends justifying the means that Kiritsugu went on to internalize himself. And even though Kiritsugu's dad did have a degree of parental affection, arguably, he also viewed Kiritsugu as a tool to carry on his work. And that was also something that Kiritsugu adopted, seeing everything and everyone as a tool. Meanwhile, Natalia groomed Kiritsugu to be an assassin. And I know that you could argue that he already had it in him and that he wanted to learn from her. But honestly, I think Kiritsugu was just way too young when Natalia took him under her wing to be truly capable of choosing this career of his. Like, she took him on missions from a young age, fully immersed him in the life of a contract killer before he likely grasped the weight of it. I would say Natalia shaped Kiritsugu into a killer, so like a more active molding process rather than just guiding an existing aspiration that Kiritsugu may have been born with. Sure, both Kiritsugu's dad and Natalia told him to wait a little longer, which sounds like they were looking out for him, but both his dad and Natalia were grooming Kiritsugu to eventually carry out the work that would destroy his soul in a way. Both of them were flawed parental figures that shaped Kiritsugu in some pretty dark ways. But although Natalia was a ruthless mercenary, she did show some ethical boundaries that differentiated her from Kiritsugu's completely amoral father. You know, not quite a good person, but at least a morally complex one. For example, she actually wrestled with guilt over shaping Kiritsugu into a killer from a young age, you know, demonstrating this awareness of the dodgy ethics involved with turning a kid into a killer, you know, something his dad wouldn't have given a second thought to. She effectively warned Kiritsugu too about his natural affinity and even enthusiasm for killing, how she found it concerning, to say the least, that he was able to emotionally dissociate right from the start, just right off the bat. As someone with a lot more life experience, Natalia did try passing on that perspective onto him just before she died. Like, she realized and she wanted him to know that a life based solely on violence and on killing would ultimately be unfulfilling and destroy his soul. You know, turn him into a machine that was completely devoid of humanity, even if it came naturally to him. And that is not a life that anyone should ever have to live. And like, to illustrate Natalia's point about how your humanity can erode over time the more killing that you do, compare the moments of Shirley and Kenneth begging Kiritsugu to end their suffering. You know, when Shirley pleaded with Kiritsugu to kill her before she turned, he hesitated despite knowing ethically that he would be justified doing so. You know, the innocence and the empathy in him meant that he couldn't bring himself to kill her, even as an act of mercy. Compared that to years later when a shot-up Kenneth begged Kiritsugu to just please put him out of his misery and grant him a quick death, Kiritsugu had been dead inside for so long by that point that he only cracked this dry joke about being unable to help. So that degrading of Kiritsugu's humanity over time was something that Natalia saw and actually warned him about. And I think there's a lesson in there for us too, even though I assume that most of us are far removed from the world of contract killers. But Natalia's point was that killing was something that Kiritsugu thought that he should do. He should do it because it was a means to making a better world. Whereas for us, you know, a lot of the time, it's hard for us to hold on to our humanity sometimes, when if all we're doing is just doing things that we feel like we should do, even though it's not necessarily what we want to do. I just think about all these people who are working dead-end jobs. It's something that they know that they should do. Sometimes it's not even a choice because, I mean, who else is going to pay the bills? But it's not something that they ultimately want to do. And so the result is, you know, a human soul that ends up being crushed more and more and more until it completely dissipates or disintegrates. While she is definitely no like paragon of virtue, Natalia did seem therefore to have an ethical framework that set her apart somewhat from this remorseless detachment that Kiritsugu's father had. You know, her cautions for Kiritsugu against going down this path of a killer shows a very complex mix of pragmatism, but also of genuine care, and maybe deep down, a lack of desire to create a monster in her own likeness. The discreet way that she carried out her killing too, I think, showed that she had certain lines that she thought shouldn't be crossed, even in her line of work. You know, she wasn't utterly chaotic. She avoided things like blowing up an entire plane full of people if she could. She also felt bad for inadvertently depriving Kiritsugu of his dad. You know, she was hunting his dad, but she also revealed to Kiritsugu the nature of his father's research, which led to Kiritsugu to the choice to carry out the murder himself. And the guilt of that led her to try and help him and raise him even, which meant teaching him everything that she knew, which in a roundabout way ultimately led to her own death. Natalia's fantasy of one day like retiring and then sharing this domestic future with Kiritsugu was the saddest part of this whole episode, that was already filled with a lot of sad moments. She came to see him as family. Years of proximity grew into affection and genuine maternal feelings for him. He filled a void in her life. Theirs was like a genuine, morally fraught relationship, which only made what Kiritsugu had to do in the end even more tragic. Someone in the comments from the last video that ended up having to be deleted mentioned something about how Natalia was actually a succubus of some kind. I don't know. So that is a whole like dumpster fire that I don't really want to touch. But if that's actually true and there was some sort of sexual element involved in the relationship, I think that changes things a lot. I would say that would definitely shift my idea of Natalia being this ultimately wholesome, if a bit morally complex, figure in Kiritsugu's life. Speaking of tragedies and dumpster fires, let's talk about Shirley's arc. Shirley deeply admired Norikata and his quest to unlock immortality. She dreamed of being able to contribute meaningfully to this grand mission and to help him see that it wasn't a dead end, that he could use his power for good. Let's pause for a sec and think whether humanity should want this gift of immortality. It seemed that Shirley only thought of the possibilities that immortality could open up, but not its huge risks and unintended consequences. Yes, immortality would allow humans to accumulate knowledge over an unlimited lifespan, therefore advancing humanity's ability to understand and harness the world's resources and knowledge and to explore the universe and all that. It also would allow people to work on long-term projects that require effort across multiple generations. And most idealistically of all, eliminating death theoretically would allow people infinite opportunities to live life to the full. But honestly, you don't have to think too far to come up against these potential drawbacks of immortality that has been covered in numerous works of literature and art and media. There's the potential for overpopulation and the subsequent straining on existing resources, the social upheaval as power structures potentially stagnate under leaders who never die and refuse to relinquish their power. There would be possibly cultural stagnation too, an increasing resistance to any change or a questioning of traditions. People would also suffer from boredom and growing apathy as life just drags on and on and on and on. And immortality, well, at least the concept of it, because no one has ever really experienced it, it can dull the urgency of needing to make the most of what life or what limited life humans have. Personally, immortality scares me a lot. Logically, and just from watching a lot of these sci-fi and fantasy series that explore the idea, I could see so many ways in which it is a terrifying curse rather than a blessing that Shirley thought it would be. Despite her naivety, Shirley was also realistic. She knew that as an outsider, she could never truly inherit the Emiya family's power or be a proper heir. Norikata would only pass down those secrets to his true successor, his son. This only fueled Shirley's desperation to prove herself useful in whatever way that she could. She took a reckless gamble of testing the immortality elixir on herself, probably hoping that any positive results would unlock the door for her to share in the glory of discovering this new knowledge. But of course, the experiment was a catastrophic failure. Instead of unlocking human immortality, the elixir transformed Shirley into a mindless, dead apostle. So she probably was immortal, just not quite immortal in the way that she wanted. I mean, what lessons do we learn from Shirley's fate? We learn the dangers of blind ambition and of hero worship. In her eagerness to align herself with Emiya greatness, Shirley kind of lost sight of reason. Her ability to weigh the risks of her actions was impaired. I also think that she thought aligning herself with Norikata would give her the chance to give her own life more meaning and significance beyond like her humble small town origins. Like it was a quest for elevated status as much as it was for knowledge. So there is something to be said about the consequences of traditional insularity and like elitism of these old mage lineages. The tendency to hoard magical knowledge and power within bloodlines through passing down these family crests means that outsiders like Shirley, as brilliant as they are, will always be viewed as unworthy of inheriting like generations of very closely guarded secrets. This exclusionary sort of mindset bred both arrogance among the elite mage lines and also on the other end, these unrealistic, idealized ideas of what it is like to be part of that tradition for those who are on the periphery, like Shirley was. Kiritsugu himself probably detested this tendency for old mage families to look down on common people like Shirley, prioritizing lineage over ability. And this sort of cloistered obsession with accruing family power also seems like a key contributing factor for why it's easy for mages to dehumanize and to devalue lesser human beings who will never rise to the same level of magical ambition as they can. Before everything went to shit, the foreshadowing of both Shirley's tragic end and the horrible end of the town itself was so strong that it just played out like a total Greek tragedy. So on top of the cursed story that the island's name is based on, there was this scene where Shirley showed Kiritsugu the talisman the Reverend had given her as protection against any curses she might encounter at the Emir mansion. This was the same dagger that she later threw at Kiritsugu to use to kill her with, except that he failed. And the dramatic irony of this religious talisman, originally intended to protect her, turning into a dagger that could only protect her by being used to kill her, was like, that was like super thick dramatic irony. The fact that she then succumbed to the curse of turning into a dead apostle because it wasn't used in its unintended way was just another ironic dig. But the most like in-your-face foreshadowing was this close-up shot of Shirley carving into the watermelon, its juices spilling out like blood, and then her taking a monstrous bite out of it. It was a very graphic foreshadowing of her loss of humanity and just taking meaty bites out of random chickens and other humans. And of course, it was easy to use, but for Kiritsugu, when it really mattered, it wasn't easy in the end. I just got this really strong sense that the writers had a lot of fun incorporating lines of dialogue and all this visual imagery that heavily predicted or foreshadowed what was going to happen. Shirley was the first to get Kiritsugu thinking about using the power that he'd inherited to make the world a better place. Kiritsugu may have been playing it cool when he told her that what he's going to do when he grows up is a secret, but it was just painfully obvious that he'd never thought about it. I mean, he's a kid, for one, a kid with a very pliable mind who has this massive crush on someone. So naturally, what Shirley said to him stuck, and it stuck even more after he witnessed and felt like he was responsible for the terrible fate that befell her and the rest of the townspeople. So there's that dramatic irony again. Shirley saying that she would stay with him ended up being true in a way. Even when he left everything behind after his world literally erupted into flames, the one thing that he did take with him was Shirley's desire for him to use his power to change the world for the better. Years later, after he blew up the plane that Natalia was on, Shirley is the one that he spoke to first in his state of hysteria. It was a desperate attempt to reaffirm his original noble purpose, that he did this horrific deed to protect people just like she once inspired him to do. Speaking to her provided Kiritsugu with this very thin assurance that he did the right thing in what was a moment of immense guilt and loss. In that moment, Kiritsugu also regressed to the innocence of that first conversation he had with Shirley by the lake. Invoking Shirley tied him back to his original childlike dream before it became stained with like tragedy and all this blood on his hands. So Shirley, she kind of haunts Kiritsugu as both an angelic inspiration and this damning sort of guilt. She represents his noble goals, but also reminds him, of the first great failure that condemned him to start down this brutal road. As a kid, Kiritsugu had no notions of saving the world. He could only grasp saving those immediately around him, like the townspeople. He didn't yet have that fervent vision or the cold calculus type of thinking needed to sacrifice a few for the greater good. That kind of came later under Natalia's mentorship. So Shirley was the one who seeded the idea of him using his power ethically, but it took years of witnessing tragedies and hard training and taking lots of lives to warp that idealism into a more grandiose and a more morally dubious sort of dream. During their missions, Natalia repeatedly told Kiritsugu that his own life must come first. If you can't save yourself, then you have no business saving others, which kind of makes sense. There's a pragmatism there that Kiritsugu follows, but there was also a sense in which he completely disregards it. Remember a couple of episodes back where he grandiosely proclaimed that he would bear all of the world's evil if it meant saving it. And this was like a key moment, I felt, where Natalia's practical mentorship stopped aligning with Kiritsugu's own uncompromising philosophy and his desire, where his thinking mutated into something a lot more extreme. When Natalia just jokingly said, killing one bad person won't work, you have to kill every last one of those bastards, it was this throwaway line meant to highlight the endless Sisyphean nature of their work. But Kiritsugu interpreted it literally and went on to make that his life's mission. Her words took on this inflated meaning in his mind, and it gave him a huge piece of the puzzle that he needed to answer Shirley's question, what are you going to do with your power? In contrast to Natalia's grounded view of what to her was just business, his twisted interpretation of her casual remarks shows that his ambitions went way beyond her original intent and that she actually inadvertently unleashed his fanaticism. So I was really struck in these episodes by how impressionable Kiritsugu is. Shirley inspired him to consider using his talents to change the world for the better, and he took that in. But it was still a vague childhood dream at that point, and he still knew that literally saving the entire world wasn't possible. And then Natalia took that seed and unintentionally showed Kiritsugu exactly what achieving that greater purpose looked like in her jaded mercenary worldview. He saw that he had to enact a moral cleansing through violence. And it just so happened that Kiritsugu came across the very means to do that, and that was the Grail. What is flawed about the idea of getting rid of all the bad people, as Kiritsugu aims to do? For starters, who gets to decide who's bad or not? So many atrocities in history have been committed in the name of getting rid of evil or getting rid of, human trash. Morality and human behavior exists on a spectrum, so who gets to decide where the line is drawn? No one person is qualified to make absolute irreversible decisions about who deserves to live and who deserves to die. And then there's the paradox of violence, which is a point that Saber made during their last little tiff. Using violence and murder to eliminate bad people is itself an unethical and arguably bad act. It creates a paradoxical cycle of adding more harm and more bad to the world. What about the impossible scale of the task? With billions of people, bad is too broad of a term. There will always be some level of human moral failing. Trying to eradicate every last offender is this never-ending and totally unrealistic task. And that's probably why Kiritsugu is gunning for the Grail. But I also don't think that the Grail will be the solution that he thinks it is. unless it turns people's minds into machines with no free will, killing individuals fails to solve like the deeper cultural and societal and psychological roots of unethical or bad behavior. Where there is human society, there will also be planted the seeds for evil deeds. Getting rid of like the bad people is, in my opinion, like a band-aid rather than a real solution to addressing systemic issues that often causes people to act badly. When the village was overrun with dead apostles, two groups came to clean up the mess. One was the church executors, who are morally averse to anyone messing with God's naturally ordained creation. And then there was the Mages Association, who want to keep all of the knowledge about how to create things like the dead apostles to themselves. Both of them intervened for their own self-interested reasons. The church killed anyone who even suspected of having had their blood sucked, while the mages killed anyone who might know anything, hence the total desolation of the village, and hence the birth of Kiritsugu's hate for both the church and the Mages Association, and his preference for working outside of those institutions. The razing of the village also says some disquieting things about established institutions that are true about our own world. You don't really need to be a conspiracy theorist to know that for large institutions like governments and entire industries, self-preservation is paramount. They will often act first and foremost to protect their own authority and their reputation and their access to knowledge. The lives of innocent people are expendable in service of those bigger aims. Now, that's not to say that things like governments aren't very complicated, because obviously they're made up of different conflicting groups of people, but there will always be at least one faction that is just out there to preserve the larger institution's authority. There's often also very little accountability. As large dominant power structures, the church and the Mages Association were unrestrained by any higher accountability in their destructive response. They essentially could operate by their own unchecked codes. So in Kiritsugu's childhood tragedy, these revered societal pillars of religious and of scholarly authority demonstrated that they are no less corruptible by human flaws than normal individuals. Their very lofty institutions became vehicles for the ugliest sort of self-interest, instead of being what they should have been, which are forces for morality and ethics and the truth. It was that hypocrisy that played a key role in shaping Kiritsugu's disillusionment. In the days leading up to Natalia's death at Kiritsugu's hands, they had accepted a mission from the Mages Association to hunt Vorzak, who was a dead apostle himself, who used bees to infect people and turn them into ghouls. The plan was for Natalia to murder him during the same flight, while Kiritsugu eliminated his allies in New York. By the way, Kiritsugu asking Natalia to bum a smoke was just peak teenage behavior, and it just reminded me of how young he was even then, like already so steeped in murders and assassinations, but also because of how young he was when he was exposed to that world. That explains why he took to the fanatical idea of purging the world of evil so easily. Killing Vorzak was like the easiest thing ever, it seemed. All Natalia had to do was draw a rune on the back of his plane seat, and that was that. I was surprised he didn't have any sort of magical barrier to prevent attacks like that. I also really loved how Natalia just casually ordered a drink after committing a murder. Everything was going really smooth, too smoothly, and we got a glimpse into how casual these murder excursions are. They were both bantering, making these dry jokes, and just kind of getting on with business. I thought the casual tone between Kiritsugu and Natalia that carried on all the way through to the end, up until the moment that he shot a torpedo at her, served to bring out even more the utter devastation of Kiritsugu's breakdown right at the end. It was like they kept a really tight lid on all of the emotion and the gravitas of the situation until it couldn't be contained anymore, and it kind of just exploded out of Kiritsugu. It's worth comparing Kiritsugu's decisions to kill his dad and Natalia and think about how it shaped him in distinctly different ways. Killing Norikata was an act of calculated necessity in Kiritsugu's mind. The killing itself was emotionally difficult, obviously because he was still a baby, but the philosophy behind it was clear-cut to him. He did it to stop his father from continuing his experiments elsewhere. So losing his dad did not fundamentally break him emotionally. It changed him for sure, but his relationship with his dad was already cold and detached to begin with. Killing his dad was also when he realized that he had the capability to kill, when convinced that that killing aligned with his moral principles. Hence the symbolism of using Shirley's talisman to stab his dad, using the very thing meant to protect Shirley against curses to kill his dad. The source of the curse that transformed Shirley was like an act of circular justice. He really appropriated and redefined the purpose of the ritual religious talisman, which was never ever meant to be a dagger for killing. But by repurposing the talisman to enact actual violence, it mirrored how Kiritsugu took the original noble intent behind Shirley's encouragement of changing the world for the better, and then perverted it into this violent crusade. Killing Natalia, on the other hand, was a pivotal moment that shattered Kiritsugu's remaining humanity and morality, while both kills pushed him further along his path to ruthlessness. His dad's murder motivated his convictions, whereas Natalia's murder just utterly broke him. So it turned out Vorzak had hidden the bees inside his own body, and they all escaped and turned the entire plane into ghouls. Great. So Natalia ended up stuck inside the cockpit with this crazy idea to land the plane in New York and then go from there. What was striking about their continued calm, affectionate conversation, or rather charade, as she flew the plane, was how obvious it was that they both knew and accepted that Kiritsugu was going to take the plane down. As soon as Kiritsugu said he'd handle the monsters, they both had to have known. The moment that she told him to prepare a nice warm bed for her, was that the moment that Kiri actually decided 100% that he was going to shoot the plane down. His reaction seems to suggest that, his mind was likely racing with all the implications, and he had probably agonized over the choice, not wanting to kill his own family and mentor, debating whether he could just kill the ghouls and let Natalia live. But in the end, Kiritsugu was able to convince himself that he had no choice. To protect everyone else, Natalia had to die. It's probably what she would have done too had they swapped positions, except for the fact that Natalia may not have pulled the trigger, given how she had come to see Kiritsugu as her own family and doesn't have his twisted iron will to sacrifice the one for the many. Whereas Natalia saw emotional detachment as a practical necessity because of the job, Kiritsugu took it to an extreme by cutting off all emotion for the sake of fanatical ambition. That was the real kicker in this whole scene. Natalia never expected to develop this parental, unconditional bond to Kiritsugu. She clearly cared for Kiritsugu's well-being and wanted to protect him, and they were each other's found family. When she talked about how she was going to retire after this job, it was just another confirmation that she knew she was going to die soon. And maybe to her, going out this way was better than any other end that she'd imagined for herself before she met Kiritsugu. For someone in her line of work, the expectation probably is that your life is going to be cut short and your death a very violent one. To be taken out by someone you love, on the other hand, for a reason that you can understand and actually agree with, could be seen as the better outcome. For his part, Kiritsugu did think of Natalia as a mother and did care about her, but he also could shut down even that human connection with her in a way that I don't think she ever could. Not to say that killing her didn't absolutely destroy him, it clearly did, but it's interesting to think of reasons why Kiritsugu was more able to shut down. And one reason might be that he had already experienced immense personal trauma and loss at a very young age. Watching Shirley transform before his eyes, losing the entire village and then killing his dad. You know, that all primed him to be able to detach emotionally as a coping mechanism. Kiritsugu was trained to be a ruthless killer from childhood when his psyche was incredibly malleable. You know, it was easier for his humanity to be systematically stripped away, I think. And we're not really given details about Natalia's upbringing, but just speculating from her outlook and her behaviors and her warning to Kiritsugu that doing what you think should be done instead of what you want to do can turn you into a machine, all of that, it's reasonable to guess that she'd had a different childhood to his, and she had already in place these boundaries and these lines that Kiritsugu never had a chance to develop himself. Kiritsugu also had this extreme ideological conviction that she never did. You know, Natalia was definitely more a pragmatic mercenary without a higher calling to numb herself to. This scene, you know, they were chatting and laughing and planning for a totally fantastical future. Maybe that's just what both sides do when they know that they'll never see each other again, you know, but they just want to keep that dream alive each second they can until it ends in a giant ball of flame. These last few moments were really cinematic. Like, there were so many seagulls around. I don't know if they symbolized anything other than to just lend a dramatic air to this very emotional and pivotal moment. This montage section that they squeezed in there, man, the music that they used really kicked you in the guts. And then, of course, Natalia's smile just before she died made this scene into, it was like peak heart-wrenching. Killing Natalia was, again, a logical choice to prevent an even bigger tragedy. But her death devastated Kiritsugu in a way that his father's didn't. She was family to him in a way that his own father never was. It also really exposed the emotional hollowness of Kiritsugu's utilitarian philosophy. It should have been a straightforward calculation. Shoot down the plane with a bunch of ghouls plus Natalia, or risk the plane landing and infecting the whole of New York and potentially the rest of the world. He'd kept his promise to Shirley, he'd made things right. But here he was completely breaking down. This yelling at himself, at the logical voice in his head telling him that he'd done the right thing to shut up, revealed that there was still a core of humanity and conflicted morality beneath Kiritsugu's very cold, utilitarian exterior. Natalia was his last true emotional connection to someone. And really, like, again, as we said, his surrogate family. Killing that destroyed his final tether to compassion and to human meaning. While he could rationalize other kills philosophically and morally, Natalia's death had this unshakable feeling of wrongness that he couldn't ignore, even if he ultimately had judged it necessary. Kiritsugu was also forced to confront the fact that he'd robbed himself of closeness and of some degree of normalcy, which he still craved deep down because he is still a red-blooded human. Natalia's death made Kiritsugu newly and utterly alone in the world. So while his dogma justified the kill, it could not suppress just the raw anguish of what he'd lost. His humanity, his identity in relation to someone that he loved and who loved him back, and also the chance of just having a meaningful personal life of his own outside of this grand mission. So there you go, 3 kills, or rather 1 failed kill and 2 successful ones that shaped who Kiritsugu is. One was the failure to kill Shirley taught him the painful necessity of doing what feels wrong for the sake of a perceived greater good. Killing his dad proved he could kill based on conviction and on principle. And then finally, killing Natalia devastated his last human connection, and it really finalized his final descent into utter solitude and detachment, and showed that he can make the ultimate personal sacrifice. No cost is too high because he's already paid that highest cost that he could ever imagine paying. Finally, just wanted to look at the lyrics of the song that was playing right at the end after Kiritsugu broke down. So, look, the time is ripe, a plump golden fruit. Kind of evokes like the naive, childlike purity that Kiritsugu embodied at the start, before it was like ruthlessly plucked and then his innocence lost. For simply plucking it with these hands will cause the world to end. I read that to mean like his youthful dreams and ambitions to change the world for the better were plucked or like shattered, precipitating his own descent into this very world-weary cynicism and fanaticism that maybe eventually will be the cause of the end of the world, because when he makes his wish, as we said on the Grail, for all war or all evil to be gotten rid of, that might actually have some unintended consequences that I don't think Kiritsugu is ready for. It also might just mean, you know, the end of the world personally for Kiritsugu. When he made that decision to kill Natalia, that was his innocence finally and, you know, irrevocably lost. And he faced his own end of the world in the form of losing the one person that actually meant something to him. The whiteness of the falling unblemished snow will disappear once it learns of warmth. Yeah, so I guess the untainted whiteness of Kiritsugu's morality and innocence and hope couldn't hold out against like the harsh warmth of exposure to violence and tragedy and guilt. A beautiful dream was enough to tear you to pieces. Here, I think it's definitely talking about Shirley's vision that first inspired Kiritsugu's path, and that ultimately destroyed him when he turned, you know, make the world a better place into a personal mission to kill everyone who dared step in the way of that vision. The truth and kindness behind those cold eyes, that could either refer to Natalia, who beneath her like tough ass exterior had a real love for Kiritsugu, or it hints at the core of humanity that still maybe exists buried deep down inside Kiritsugu's cold, dead heart. The furiously twinkling stars turn away from the heavens. I see that as Kiritsugu's burning idealism kind of fading away, you know, becoming cold and disconnected from his original principles of morality and of justice, until these injurious prayers bring down the sky. Literally, like he was screaming at the skies when he had an emotional meltdown after killing Natalia. It really points to his desire for his actions to be validated, but ultimately it also betrays like his ultimate inability to make meaning out of his now twisted and kind of shattered dreams and ideals. Yeah, so this song is pretty haunting. I think the lyrics generally, they just chart Kiritsugu's brutal journey from like wide-eyed, childlike hope to hardened, anguished disillusionment. They hint at sort of the last remnants of a very hopeful morality that still kind of survives, but just barely, and in this very deformed, twisted form. Okay, guys, here we go. Episode 7 of Season 2 of Fate Zero in 3, 2, 1, play. can't believe Maya's still alive, to be honest. I also wonder if Maya reminded Kiritsugu of Natalia. Yeah, they kind of have similar characteristics, right? Cold blooded or seemingly cold blooded, natural, mercenary like killers, but who were able to form this incredible emotional attachment to Kiritsugu. And I would say this OP is also heavily centered around Kiritsugu's story. Not looking forward to that scene where Arisful just not dies. I don't know. I don't think you could call it a death. It's more reverting back to her original form in a most horrific way. Man, those last two episodes of Baby Kiritsugu. Yeah, they're great. It's almost like she didn't want to hope that he'd come to see her before she turned. Oh, is that the sheath? Man, it's kind of incredible that after he cut off Natalia, that he was still able to find this family. Another found family, really. Man, he's just one lucky bastard, isn't he? He's still able to have these human or humanish connections to other people. I mean, that's why Kirei doesn't get Kiritsugu. He's like, how did you do it? And Arsville, it's also just one of those cases where it's like, is it better to have had than not had anything at all? She'd say yes. Well, that boat has sailed. That was an interesting line. just Wave is just doing some casual shopping. Man, I haven't seen Wave and Ryder for so long. Kind of miss them. They provided like this much needed levity to Fate. Don't shoot the bird. He's gonna find Kirei. Wait, where is he? Is he in his head now? Like, you noob, you culinary noob. Oh yes, that's right. Okay, yes. Man, he must have really like been damaged by summoning that marble. Huh. Just angry swig. But what is he mad at? Oh, that he hid his, like, how much it cost him? But he would have known. Oh, he didn't draw on any of Waver's matter. Maybe because there's not much to draw on in the first place. I mean, he just wants to protect his little bro. But also, he is Alexander the Great, who, you know, led from the front. He's got, you know, he's got a rep to protect. Oh man, but you're still a kid. Oh my god, what if this all turned out to be like a joke? Just a myth. Doesn't it actually exist? Damn. That would be like the ultimate twist. They never reached it. I mean, was men rebelled before they reached the, you know, edge of the world. Mm. He's like, you can't get to the edge of the world because there is no edge. Wow, this is character development for Ryder. This is him acknowledging that certain things are more important than chasing a dream that may not even be a thing. It's like, Saber's coming. thing is, Saber will not attack Ryder if he's in this state, right? Still, like, kind of looking down on Saber relative to Asha. Well, so he has to kill Saber in order for her to realize that there's more to life than just duty. Ironic, but okay. Ha! Is that Lancelot? Saber? Oh. Oh. Oh, I was like, man, we just haven't seen him for so long. I was like, who's that? Katia. Oh my god. More parental abuse. Man. I wonder if Kirei dumped him on the doorsteps of his own house so that Zorkin would find him, and that would be like his ultimate, suffering, being found by his own dad, and that's. Oh my god. I hate this. Oh my god. Oh, he's barely a corpse at this point. Oh, that is the worst. I mean, he's doing this to save her. Now he's feeding on her life force. Oh, his story is the worst. Hmm. It's just another tragic story. Just another number, like, in this war. That's really sad. But it is a reason to fight for someone who can offer like a bigger vision and like a purpose. Yep, she's just another machine, or rather, another cog in the machine. Well, he probably saw himself in her. I mean, those two can bond over being turned into machines. I love that they're having this conversation while he's figuring out what happened to Takumi. Oh man, this is what an insane reveal. Why Arisville followed along with Kiritsugu. Arisville. It's she's essentially admitted to the fact that she doesn't really have a guiding ultimate moral goal, which is what Kiritsugu has. But he looks to her for confirmation that he's actually on the right track, and she had to pretend that he is on the right track, that she believes in something, the same thing that he does, when really she took it from him. Okay, but at the same time, she also has a kid that she's looking out for. She wants to be the last Grail. Ugh. Okay, that's... Yep. She's working for a world where she has no purpose. I love these two. What a surprising duo. Yep, this is where she dies after they had this incredibly meaningful conversation and encouraged each other to continue having a purpose. This is where Maya dies horribly, of course. My puffet. uh, hey, first use of Komatsu. She's like, go get Arisville. No, this isn't how she dies. She can't. She needs to go out like guns blazing. It is also actually really cool how Saber has developed a bond with Maya as well. Man, the trio of them, Maya, Arisville, and Saber. Kiritsugu is one lucky dude. Scared chase him on a motorbike. Like, how much suffering do we have to see Kiritsugu go through? What? I was like, no, there's no way that this is how they make her die. It was so, one, it was really sudden. Two, it was Ryder just busting through the doors and there wasn't any real combat. I mean, she shot at him a couple of times, but his goal was to just nab Arisfield. And now she's gone. Oh man. I mean, look, I wanted Maya to go out guns blazing. Like I always knew that she wasn't one of those characters that was going to survive this. But maybe that's just the way it goes. War, you aren't guaranteed a death, like a gloriful, that's not a word, but a glorious sort of death. You can just go out just like that. And it can just be a totally numbing sort of sideshow, your death. Man. Okay, that conversation that Maya had with Arisfield, I just love when the two of them have these heart-to-hearts. You know, Arisfield, it's true, she didn't grow up in the world and she wasn't exposed to all the things that the world has and is all about, but she was able to, at the same time, because of the way that Kiritsugu had given her a life for 9 years, she was able to hold on to that experience and then to pass that wisdom on to Maya, to be like, look, you are more than just a cog in the machine. You are more than someone who pulls the trigger for someone else. You, after this world that Kiritsugu supposedly will create, you know, where a world where there's no war and conflict, you can then go on and discover your true purpose. You know, as a human being, you are entitled to, and you were created to be more, you know, to have passion, to have purpose, and to live a full life, just like Arisfield did for the few years that she could. The other thing that's just sticking out to me right now is Kadia. And one, well, what I said before when I noticed that, you know, he was back in his own manner, that Kirei probably had a design on that too. You know, he realized that going home was the last thing that Kadia probably wanted, because that meant facing his dad and facing the fact that he'd failed in his mission to kill Tokiomi. And so just, man, just everything going back to Kirei being the most awful human being who wants to create max chaos and damage to everyone else around him just for the fun of it. And also the irony, or the tragic irony of how Karia had to be kept alive using the worm that fed on Sakura. And he didn't really have a choice in the matter. Again, I still feel like Karia is, out of everyone, the most tragic in terms of not really having a bigger purpose outside of, just trying to rectify the mistakes of his past and trying to minimize the collateral damage, i.e. Sakura, the best way he can. And even then, he's not doing very well on that regard. There was also the interesting revealing scene of Berserker speaking for the first time, I believe, and basically saying how he is this sum total of hate. Something like that. I'll have to go back and see exactly what he said. But I just got this strong impression that he is for one, I think it's Lancelot, except it's Lancelot reduced down to the hatred and the envy that he had for King Arthur when he was still alive. Everything good about him, any loyalty, any compassion, anything good was stripped away and then condensed down into this vile, hate-filled core of a spirit. His sole focus and attention is on Saber. Imagine if you took the feeling of hate that you had for someone and then just allowed it to fester for hundreds and hundreds of years, and then that's what you get. It's this totally devoid of any logic or reason or mitigating sort of humanity. And it's just a solid core of vengeance. I feel like I've said a lot how Kiritsugu has had his humanity stripped away, and he's just hardened himself into a cold, calculating human being. But when we see him in these intimate moments with the people who are close to him, like Maya and like Arisville, his humanity actually comes to the surface really quickly. It's not that he's turned himself into an emotionless killer. That's just one aspect, one part of him that he uses to accomplish his grander vision. But the other parts of him, the ones that are still connected to people, they are what keeps him grounded to things like compassion and care and love. Kirei is always constantly asking, like, what is with Kiritsugu? Why does he have these people around him who love him like that? I think it's because they're drawn to that part of him. Like, both Maya and Arisville openly admitted that they don't really have their own grand vision. They attached themselves to Kiritsugu really because they were drawn by his overwhelming compassion for the world and for the downtrodden, for the poor, for people who have been wronged by just unscrupulous characters. And that's really the irony, I guess, of Kiritsugu's character. He has so much compassion and so much love for the world and for other people, including total random strangers, that he's had to harden himself in order to create the kind of world that he envisions and he wants for these people that he cares so much about. It's just awesome character writing. I don't think I've come across someone like Kiritsugu in a long time. Yes, it's been great kind of just trying to get to the core of his character and then coming across these like really different, almost contradictory aspects of him that exist side by side each other. Straight on to Ep 8 in 3, 2, 1, play. She's like, no one steals my girlfriend. Oh man. I guess we could talk about Ryder too. Just the way that he's so intent on quote unquote teaching Saber a lesson. I remember like we had the whole discussion around, whether Ryder really is as right as he thinks he is, and that Saber also has a point about how, sacrificing herself for the nation isn't as silly as Ryder is making it out to be. I mean, his whole thing about how Saber turned herself into this distant ruler that no one could relate to. Yeah, I remember it not quite hitting me in the right way. And I was like, well, that's not really right. King Arthur, again, he also was the kind of ruler to lead from the front, according to legend, and inspired a lot of people to take up arms, especially like the Knights of the Round Table. So yeah, I don't know. And Ryder himself, he didn't have the perfect track record of leadership either. A lot of his men ended up rebelling because they didn't want to be led to the edge of the world, you know. Okay, do like if a heroic spirit in this form smashes into a truck, I'm assuming they would die. I don't know if their spirit can just suddenly, um, you know, jump out of the body. No. She's like fusing it with her her mana. It's just like I'll beat her with my wheels. I mean, I don't know how well modern roads are suited for like huge chariots. Hmm. Is that like a part of Ryder's chariot that broke off? Ah, she's so cool. Okay, I'm guessing that if ever it was a truck versus Saber's like reinforced motorbike, Saber would win in a head-on collision. He's like, ooh, a technology. Mm-hmm. uh, man, just plain dirty. I love that she's just giving it right back to him. He's always been so like demeaning in the way that he talks to her. He's telling her that she's not a true king. But he definitely respects like her combat abilities. Oh, that shot. Damn. I love these two together as well. Can't I just dropped her in the forest? Oh. Oh. Oh, they're working together. No. Oh, he's just gonna use you and then chuck you out. Karia. That's right. He has like a billion command seals to use, right? To give away. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Man, so I mean, kind of works up Karia that he's working with Kirei, who has unlimited command seals because he really needed that for a berserker. He just wants to play with Kiritsugu. He doesn't even want the grail. But you know, he's gonna double cross him. No. Oh, he's probably gonna get, I don't know, Aoi, Tokiumi's wife, and have her show up there, and then Cuddy has to be like, I actually killed your husband. Oh my god. The two worst people together. Man, it's kind of similar to Archer. They're both trying to collect her in a way. Mm. Although at least Ryder sort of cherishes the person as opposed to Archer, who just looks at them as an object. He definitely underestimates Saber though, and her willingness to bend the knee. I don't want these two to fight. Not when Kirei is still out there. Oh man, she's pulling that out right away. Oh my god. They're the same kind of person. Kirei is still like discovering parts of himself that he didn't even know he had. Ooh, but he is not gonna like this characterization. Ugh, it's so weird how there's this like psychopathic mentorship going on. He just jumped into a tree. Get away. Can't. She won't kill him like this while he's hanging on a tree. Did he just fall asleep for a second there? How interesting that Saber was like, you're gonna have to come at me harder because I know that you underestimate me, so I'm not gonna kill you this way. Oh, I'm gonna hate this. Oh no. Eh, that's not it. Shit. Oh my god. Okay, Aoi's gonna walk in, isn't she? She's gonna be like, "You killed him." Come on, Aoi, you would just use your brain. Like, why would he invite you to the church? Just to show you that he killed him. He's gonna slap him. It's true. Her. She loved her. Oh god, he's gonna kill her. Oh my god. He's killing her in a rage. That was like a blackout of a murder. Oh god, oh god. Oh my god. bloody Archer with his glass of red wine. Kirei, are you thinking about how you're a maggot now, attracted to rotten meat yet? Nope. Well, he is, but he's like, I can live with being that. It's funny because, like, probably the only taste of wine that he's had at this point is, like, I don't know, when they have, like, church rituals. So it's more like a sense of duty. Whereas this wine is, like, after having seen this beautiful drama that he set up and set into motion. And he's like, I like this taste better. I like the taste of people suffering and breaking from the utmost like sadness and grief that they can possibly bear. I was actually kind of half expecting Karia to take his own life after that, but he's essentially dead inside now. Like, it doesn't matter if he's still living and breathing, he doesn't have a life to live anymore. I don't know, like, I knew as soon as Kirei lied about setting up a meeting with Tokiyomi for Karia that he would somehow get Aoi to the scene and then set it up so that Aoi mistakenly took that Karia had murdered her husband. I was just like, I'm not sure how he's gonna quite do it, but it was just really a simple case of putting Tokiyomi's corpse there and then just ensuring that the timing was right. Karia, it is absolutely unforgivable that he murdered Aoi in that way. Like, it is never, ever, ever okay to kill someone in cold blood like that for any reason. The fact that he did it because she mistakenly, it wasn't even the fact that she thought that he'd killed Tokiyomi, that he was mad at her. It was the fact that she then made the conclusion that he'd never loved anyone in his life. And he was enraged because to him, he had in fact loved her for probably, I don't know, since he was young. And it was the sole driving force for why he decided to get involved in the Grail War. You know, he was doing it to get Sakura back so that Aoi could be happy. That was his whole reason for putting himself through the worms and like suffering his dad's, pillorying of him. But then to be so enraged to the point of murdering the object of your so-called love, it's dark, man. Like, Karia was already pretty far gone into the depths and the darkness of his mind, and this just further proved the point that he has totally lost his mind. Like, fate is so good at presenting a character who has this seemingly straightforward goal, but then just twisting that goal and turning it into something that is ironically the complete opposite of what the character themselves wanted. Like with Kiritsugu, it's, justice and ending war, which will probably end up twisted in some way that he never wanted. Karia, of course, it was like wanting to do something good for Aoi because he loved her, and then in the end he just ended up killing her. Kirei, I don't know, I feel like maybe the only person who's going to come out of this, like, right, even if he does end up dying, is Kirei, because he had his fun. Like, that's all he's living for now. It's to enjoy the sweet, sweet taste of someone else's anguish and suffering alongside his BFF Archer. Something else that I couldn't quite get at in the moment was it was really ironic because Kariya has this whole time wanted to murder Tokiomi. That was his goal because he hated how Tokiomi treated Aoi and the rest of his family, gave away Sakura to the Matos, and essentially rubbed it in his face that he was this useless mage that shamed his family. You know, he was always going to murder Tokiomi. But then at the same time, he had kind of separated that out from his love for Aoi. I'm like, okay, would it really have been that much better if you hadn't murdered Tokiomi? I mean, if you had murdered Tokiomi but just away from Aoi, like, what's the difference? You either murder Tokiomi in front of her or you murder Tokiomi away from her. She's gonna be equally as upset. And so in his mind, for some reason, he wasn't able to compute the fact that what he's doing is totally not consistent with his professed love for Aoi. So I thought that was just, it was bizarre, but also not, because Kariya, his mind is just not there. The other, just like chilling moment was, of course, when Zorkin came to have a little chat, a little friendly chat with Kirei, and pointed out that they are very alike. You know, they love basking in the suffering of others. Kind of like, I think he used the imagery of a maggot being drawn to rotten meat, which kind of ticked off Kariya a little. But I feel like by the end of this episode, you know, that reality had hit him. He kind of let it sink in a little. It didn't feel great to be told that you're a little maggot. But I feel like by the end of this episode, Kirei had made peace with that, or even embraced it. You know, lean into the maggotry and be like, yes, this is who I am. So it was interesting that there were still traces of this identity crisis that he's been having ever since even before he killed Tokiomi. You know, he's been having this whole time that he's been working for his dad and Tokiomi. And I feel like those traces are just getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, such that he no longer feels an inconsistency with how he was raised versus how he is now. Heaps to discuss for the next 2 episodes already. I look forward to reading your comments. Hopefully this time they won't all disappear on me because of some copyright violation. I hope you enjoyed watching these 2 episodes as much as I did, and I look forward to really digging into some deeper character stuff. Fate just keeps throwing us these character studies and going deeper and deeper and deeper into them. It's actually really impressive. Anyway, have a great rest of the week, and I will see you next time.